You know, when you hear the word intent, you probably think about someone's motive, right? Like planning to do something, usually something wrong. But in the world of law, intent is a totally different beast. Well, it's a lot stranger than you'd think. And to really get how strange, we have to start with a puzzle.
So get this, can a 5-year-old kid, a kid who probably still needs help tying his shoes, be legally on the hook for an $11,000 injury? It sounds completely nuts, but believe it or not, it actually happened.
The case is called Garratt versus Dailey, and the facts are almost ridiculously simple. You have Dailey, who's 5. He moves a lawn chair. Then you have Ruth Garratt, an adult, who goes to sit down where that chair used to be. She falls and she fractures her hip. This is what the law calls a tort, which is just a fancy term for a civil wrong that hurts someone. And that one little action, moving a chair, forced the courts to get crystal clear on what intent really means. So, to figure out how a 5-year-old can get hit with a huge bill, we're going to first break down this case of the chair. Then, we'll get into the 2-part legal definition of intent that makes this all possible. After that, we'll look at some other weird cases involving incapacity and even just plain old mistakes. And finally, we'll pull it all together to see why this legal definition matters so much.
Okay, so let's get right back to Brian Dailey and that fateful lawn chair.
So the first court that heard the case looked at Brian's mindset and basically said, look, he's a little kid. He wasn't trying to hurt her. He didn't have some evil plan. The court found he had no intent to injure. So that's it, right? Case closed. The kid is obviously off the hook. Well, not so fast.
And that's the heart of the puzzle. If the court itself said he didn't mean to hurt anyone, how in the world could he be held responsible for an $11,000 medical bill? It just seems to fly in the face of common sense. But the answer is hiding in a very specific and very important legal definition.
And that brings us to the key that unlocks this entire mystery, what the law calls the 2 prongs of intent.
Okay, so according to the official rulebook for this stuff, the Restatement of Torts, there are actually 2 different ways to prove legal intent. The first one, Part A, is the one we all get. You act with the purpose of making something happen. But Part B is the real game changer here. You can also have intent if you act knowing that a consequence is substantially certain to happen.
Let's make this super clear. Purpose is easy. Your goal is the result. You want the bullseye, so you throw the dart. Substantial certainty is different. You might not want the outcome, but you know it's pretty much guaranteed to happen because of what you're doing. Think about it. A demolition crew blows up a building. Their purpose is to demolish it, but they also know with substantial certainty that dust and debris will cover the street. That's intent too.
And the law sets a really high bar here. It's not enough for the result to be just likely or probable. As the restatement says, the outcome has to be substantially certain to happen. We're talking practically a sure thing.
And this was the big aha moment in the Garratt case. The appeals court looked at the first ruling and realized the judge only asked about Part A, Brian's purpose. They never even considered Part B, what Brian knew was substantially certain to happen. So they sent the case back down and said, hey, you need to ask this other question.
So on the second go-around, the judge found that, even though Brian didn't want to hurt Miss Garratt, he was old enough to know with substantial certainty that if you pull a chair away from a person who's about to sit down, they're going to fall. And that knowledge, that certainty, was all it took. Brian Dailey was held liable for the full $11,000.
Okay, so a 5-year-old can form legal intent. That's pretty wild. But what happens when the person acting is truly mentally impaired? Let's dig into that with another strange case, the case of the nurse.
This really pushes the rule to its absolute limit, doesn't it? Does this whole idea of intent even make sense when the person is legally insane, maybe even suffering from powerful delusions?
So in this case, McGuire v. Almy, a nurse was trying to care for a patient who's having a violent episode. The patient actually threatened the nurse and then hit her over the head with a broken piece of furniture. And again, the court's decision was pretty shocking. The patient, despite being legally insane, was held liable for the nurse's injuries.
And here is the absolutely crucial part. The law doesn't care why the person formed the intent. It doesn't matter if the intent came from a sane mind or a delusion. The only question the law asks is if they were capable of forming the basic intent to make contact. And in this case, the patient intended to swing that object and hit the nurse. That was enough.
All right, so we've seen that age and insanity don't necessarily get you out of it. But what about just messing up? Making an honest mistake or just having terrible aim? Take the case of Ranson versus Kitner. You had some guys out hunting for wolves, they see an animal,
They think it's a wolf and they shoot it. Turns out it was someone's dog. They made a good faith mistake, right? But the court held them liable. Why? Because they intended to pull the trigger and shoot the animal that was right there in their sights. The fact that they were mistaken about what the animal was didn't cancel out their intent to shoot it.
Okay, what about just plain bad aim? In Talmage v. Smith, a guy sees some kids trespassing on his property on a shed. He gets mad and throws a stick at one of the boys, but he misses, and the stick hits a completely different kid that he couldn't even see. And you guessed it, the court held him liable for that too, all thanks to this really interesting legal idea.
It's called the doctrine of transferred intent. It's kind of like a legal magic trick. The law basically says, look, you meant to commit a wrong against person A. Your action ended up hurting person B instead. So we're just going to slide that bad intent of yours from A over to B.
You can see it step by step. The intent is formed to hit the first boy. The action is taken, the stick is thrown, an unintended person gets hurt. And then the law just completes the circuit by transferring the original intent, making the man responsible for where his stick actually landed.
So, we've looked at a 5-year-old, an insane patient, some mistaken hunters, and a guy with really bad aim. Let's pull all of these wild stories together and see the big picture that's forming.
When you put all 4 cases side by side like this, the pattern just jumps out at you. For the 5-year-old, knowing the result was substantially certain was enough. For the patient, insanity didn't matter because the basic intent to strike was there. For the hunters, being mistaken about the target was no excuse, and for the man with bad aim, his intent just got transferred to the person he actually hit. 4 totally different situations, all leading to the exact same legal conclusion. Yep, that was intent. So, here's the absolute bottom line, the thing you have to remember. Legal intent isn't about being a bad person. It's not about malice or wanting to cause pain. It is a much colder, more technical concept. It's all about whether you intended to produce a consequence, like moving a chair or swinging an object or throwing a stick, that ultimately caused the problem.
And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. Is this super broad, sometimes really weird definition of intent actually about finding someone to blame in a moral sense? Or is it about something way more practical? Is the law just trying to make sure that when one person's action hurts another, the injured person gets paid back by the one who set everything in motion, no matter what was going on in their head at the time?